Okay, so welcome to this morning's lecture presentation on Python. Today's topic is going to be Introduction to Manipulating Files and Directories using what is called OS, which stands for Operating System Module. Now, this is an important topic because most of the time, as you are doing your programming, you will have to work with files. We saw last week how to create text files, but you might have to do more than that, in that you might also have to work with directories. Sometimes you have to do certain common things like finding out where you are on the computer, or you might have to rename some particular file, you might have to delete some particular directory and stuff like that. So this is basically you creating your program in such a way that it's able to work across the whole place. When you consider an operating system like Linux or Windows, there are certain commands which these particular operating systems offer for you to do certain things. Now, if you include Linux commands in your Python program, which many people do, or you include Windows commands in your Python program, which many people can do, then you give this particular program, which contains commands from a different operating system, to run on another operating system, it will not work, it will fail. Yeah, he has to, yeah. Okay, so Python provides this module, this OS module, which contains functions which are equivalent to certain commands from different operating systems. So through this particular module, you can write your program in such a way that it is able to work across any operating system. So it's not operating system dependent, because if a program depends on the machine, it's machine dependent. And also, if it depends on a particular operating system, then it can only work on computers which are using that particular operating system. So this is a way of trying to see how we can leverage the functionality which is in this particular library or this particular module, so that you can write programs which can work across any computer. So what we are going to do in this particular case, we'll import our OS module. OS stands for operating system. And this OS module is designed to work across Linux computers, across Windows computers, and across Mac computers. So the other things we're going to do after we have imported this particular module, we want to see how you can list the contents of a directory. So there is commands for doing that in Linux. We want to see how, and also in Windows, we want to see how you can create a new directory using Python. There's different commands for doing these things we're trying to look at in both Linux and Windows. Okay, but if you use those commands in your Python program, then it means that your particular program is only going to work on a computer without a particular operating system. We also want to see how you can change the directory from which you're working from. Then we want to see how you can print your current working directory. Then we want to see how you can create multiple text files inside the directory. We want to see how you can rename an existing file. You want to see how you can delete an existing file. We want to see how you can check if a particular file exists. We also want to see how you can delete multiple files from a directory. Then we want to see how you can delete a directory. So basically, these are very, very common tasks which as you are using your computer, you'll be able to you're expected to carry out. And this functionality and many more of doing common computer tasks like this are made available to you in Python using this module called OS. So this provides computer operating system level functionality so that you can perform multiple file manipulation operations like that. Okay. All right. So how are we going to import this particular module? Now, the OS module is part of what is called the Python standard library. So when you install Python on your computer, Python installs the actual Python itself, which is core Python. But there are other things which are installed as you're installing Python. Things or items or packages which are part of what is called the Python standard library. So apart from you just installing your normal Python, your installation file is going to install what is referred to as a Python standard library. And in this Python standard library, that's where you're going to find this particular OS. Okay. So for us to make use of this particular module OS, we simply say import OS. So when I run that, it doesn't complain. That means it has run. Then I use this particular function, dir, which stands for directory. Basically, I want to see, now that I've imported OS, what items or what data or what functionality does OS bring? What do I have access to? So you give whatever, you give your module, which you have imported, which is OS, we give it to this particular function dir, and this particular function dir is going to save the contents of whatever we have is in OS in this particular variable content. You've seen what's happening? Yeah. Projector. Yeah.
It looks like there's conflict.
No, I don't know, it's moving a bit. Just okay. All right. So whatever the contents are, there will be of whatever we have access to from OS, that will be saved in contents like that. So if I run that, then now when I print contents, I have access to this particular list. So you can see it starts with the square brackets. It's a long list. It goes all the way up to down here. So these which we have here, as you can see, these are, most of these are functions. And these particular functions, these are functions which perform tasks which are equivalent to some Linux commands, which are also equivalent to some Windows commands which you can use in your command line. That's what these things are. These are functions which perform tasks which are equivalent to Linux commands. So if you've used Linux, then you type a particular command, the functionality which that particular command provides, you might find something. If it's a common command, you might find a similar functionality being offered by one of these things which are in there. Okay. So, if we want to access, for example, the name of the module, in this particular case, we'll say os dot, then underscore, double underscore, then name, then after that, another double underscore. If I do that, then this is going to display the name of the module, which is basically what you have imported here, which is OS. There. Now, since we are going to be working with directories, of course we're going to create directories. There are two types of directories you should be interested in. The directory where you are, which is what is called the current working directory or the present working directory. Then there's a directory where you're coming from, which is what is called the parent directory. So for you to be in the directory where you are, you must have come from somewhere. So it's either you come from somewhere, then you get into a particular directory. So the directory where you are is represented in Python using the following character, using this particular attribute. This is for current directory, so it's represented.
Maybe it's the cable, don't you?
You guys,
Someone has
Dr. Mdenda got our black cable, but he hasn't returned. Did he return it to you guys? Can you bring it? So the directory where you are is represented using this one.
So in the meantime, maybe can you try to switch on the projector on and off?
it's not a it doesn't look like it's a projector thing. It's still happening even without the projector being connected.
Maybe you can try to. Switch on and off the computer.
Let's see first. Okay, so how do we represent the directory where we are? So you type OS, then you put a dot, then you access this particular attribute, which is short for current directory. So as we can see, the current directory is represented by a dot, a string with a dot. So you've got a string which contains only one element, one character, which is a dot. So if you give that a string and a dot, that represents the directory where you are. Are we clear? If you want to represent the parent directory, the directory from which you are coming from, so in this particular case, if I do that, then you can see this is being represented by two dots, a string which contains two dots. So for a single dot with quotation marks, that represents the current directory. For two dots with string like this, that represents your parent directory. So how are we going to just pause it better. So how are we going to see or list the contents of a directory? When it comes to listing directory contents, there is a function called list_dir, which is short for list directory. So the way you do this is you access, since this function is in OS, so you start out with OS, then you put a dot, then the name of the function, which is list_dir, then you put the path. The path is the directory you want, whose contents you want to list. Is it a directory where you are? If it's a directory where you are, then this path is simply going to be this string with a dot. So that string with a dot is going to say, can you list the contents of the directory where I am right now? That's the easiest way to do it. Without naming the name of the directory, just you're telling Python, can you list the items which are in the directory where I am? And that's going to do that. If you want some other directory, if you've got a specific directory in mind, in that particular place where you are, then you have to put the name of that directory, then it will list the contents of that particular directory. So in this case, we want to list the contents of the directory where I'm running this particular file, which is the current working directory. So I'll say os.list directory, then I put in the path, which is the directory where I am running this particular file from. The contents of this particular directory will be saved in contents, then I'll print out contents like that. So when I print out contents, this is what you see. So this basically gives me a list of everything which is in my home directory on my computer. So as you can see, there's documents here, there's a bunch of other files. What else might be familiar? There's documents, there's lab reports for energy, there's all sorts of files here. So basically this is what you get. There's downloads here. It lists the files which are visible. It also lists invisible files. So basically everything which is in that particular directory, whether it's a hidden file or it's a visible file, everything gets listed and it gets put in this particular list. So the advantage here is that we are using things which you already have, which you're already familiar with. Our information is being stored as a list, and we have already looked at lists, and we know what to do with lists. So that is this guy's messed up most of the time. So that is a good thing in our case. So that is how, by using this particular function, list dir, this is how you get to access anything which is in a particular directory. The other thing you could probably do is, okay, fine. How about the things which are maybe where? In this particular folder, in my documents. Now that I've seen in this particular document, in this particular folder, there is this stuff, I've listed like that. How about me listing the things which are in my documents? So for me to list the stuff which is in my documents, I'll do the following. So let me just add another line. Okay. So I'll say contents, then os dot list dir, then in there I put the name of the file, the name of the folder whose items I want to see. In this particular case, I want to see what is in my documents. I just type in the name of the folder like that. So when I do that and I run that, fine, it runs. Then next I can print contents like that, and when I print contents, now I have access to these folders in my documents folder. This is the same thing as me clicking here. When I click on my home directory, these are the things I see. When I click in my home directory, these are things, but you're only seeing these, but there is also invisible files. So that's the equivalent operation with what we did here. When we said os.list dir, all the contents which are there, this is what you printed. You can see there is Africa there. Here there is that's the Africa folder you have there. There is a bunch of other stuff like that. So we are using the computer in two different ways. One way is for you to use this, which is a file explorer or the graphical user interface, which is what most people do. The other way is for you to use the command line, and there are different ways of using the command line. You can use specific tools for a particular operating system, but what we want to do is to use Python programming so that we create programs which are going to work on any operating system, whether it's on Linux or it's Windows, and that's what basically we are doing there. Okay, so apart from that, the other thing you can do is you might want to create a folder. So how do we do that? For you to create a folder, you have to use this particular function, mkdir. Mkdir means that it stands for make directory. And the way you do that is you type OS, then you put a dot, then you type mkdir, then inside here you put in quotation marks the name of the directory you want to create. Are we clear? So in this particular case, on my computer here, there is, if you look around here, I want to create a folder called planets. So it's going to have P. So here I've got pictures, I've got Python, I've got something to do with physics here, public here, but the folder which I'm trying to create is not yet there. The folder we're trying to create is a folder called planets. So we'll create a folder called planets in our home directory, and the way we're going to do that is going to say os.make directory, then the name of the folder I want to create, which is that. So if I run that command, it runs. Now if I check this side, now you see that planets has been created this side. So that's how, this is the same thing you would do if you say right click here, then create new folder, then you type in the name of, create new folder here, type new folder, then you type in the name of the folder. It's the same step, except in one line we have done everything. So here you kind of have to do a bit more steps. Then after creating this particular folder, I now try to get a new list of what particular items are in my current working folder. With that, Then I print out the contents of that particular list. Okay, there it is. So it's a big list. Now in this particular list, you see planets is here. Okay, so if I check, now if I want to check whether planets is actually in contents, I say planets in contents. I want to check if planets is a member of that particular list. Now it tells me true. So we have seen how to list directory contents. We have seen how to create a directory using Python. The other thing we want to do now is, now that you have created this directory, Python planets, how do we get inside a directory? You've created a directory. How do you get inside that particular directory? And that's where this particular function, chdir, ch for change, dir is directory. So for this particular one, you type os, then .chdir, then the name of the directory you want to get into. So the directory you want to get into right now is planets, the one we've just created. So I'll say os.chdir, then planets. So when I do that, this particular one gets me into planets. We have just created the directory planets, so we are sure it doesn't have anything. So if we check the contents, now that we are in planets, we check the contents of planets using the same thing, just this dot. If we do that, then we print planets. You find that planets does not have any items. You only get an empty list. The reason why you get an empty list is because we've just created the directory, it doesn't have anything. Okay, now how do you find out in what directory you are in? Apart from just listing what's in your directory, how do you find out the directory in which you're in? The way to do that is to use a function called getCwd. GetCwd stands for get current working directory. This is the equivalent in Python, in Linux for pwd. There's a command called pwd in Linux. So the way you use this one you don't give it anything. It will just give you a result, because you are simply looking for where you are at the moment. So you type os.getCwd. So when you saw getCwd, it's going to give you the name of the directory where you're in. So in this particular case, when you type os.getCwd, it will give us something. Whatever it's going to give us, because it's a function, we want to store it in a variable called ans, which is for answer, the answer to our question, where are we currently in our computer. Then if you print out this particular answer, it tells you here, say, okay, fine, it looks like I am in gift and I'm in my home directory, and I have entered the folder planets there. So our chdir, the operation of getting into that particular folder, did succeed. And if we find out where we are, you can see that that's basically what we have there. So we have listed the contents of a directory. We have created a directory. We have got into a directory, and we have printed out where we are. Now, if you want to create files, multiple files, in this particular directory, for example, you need a list of these files you want to create. A list which contains the name of the files. So after you have a list of which contains the name of the files, then you have to use a for loop and what we did last week, using the open function and the mod X for creation. So the list of files we want to create is mercury.json, venus.json, earth.json, and mars.json. So this is a list of files I want to create in that particular planet. So basically, this is something we're talking about lists. These are things we have done before. So we're building on what we already know, on the Python which we already know, and trying to use it in different ways. So that's basically the name of the files which I have. Now the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use a for loop. So I'm going to say for file name in file names. So this bit here, this is a list of file names. So I'll be picking one item from that list. Then I'll store it in file name. Then using this file name, I create that particular file. So, and the creation of that particular file is done using this line here. So open, then file, we set it file name, then mod X, that's for creation, then you do that. So when I do that, There, it's running. Okay, that's finished. Now remember when we checked what was in our directory, our planets directory, the contents, when we checked it was empty. Now that you have created these particular files, when we check the contents of our planets there, then we print the contents. Now you see that it is no longer empty. Now it contains these particular files which have been created there. So using that arrangement, you can create multiple files at once and store them there. Once you have created a particular file, sometimes it's necessary that you might have to rename a particular file. So if you need to rename a file, then there's a function which does that, which is called rename. So the way this particular function works is that you start with os.rename, you give it the name of the file you want to rename. Then you give it the name you want to change it to. So the source file needs to be already there. Otherwise, you can't rename something which is not there. Okay? Then the destination is the name of the file you want to change it to. So in this particular case, again, if we get the content, we get the contents of this dir, then we print them. This is what we have. So what we want to do is we want to change earth.json to gaia.json because Gaia is the Greek name for earth. Okay, so if is the Greek or Latin name for earth. So if you want to change, rename earth.json to gaia.json, then the way we do that is you start out with os.rename, then you put the name of the file you want to rename and the name you want to change it to like that. A rename operation is something which we commonly do on a computer. You right click on a file, then you look for where rename is, then you change the name of the file appropriately, and this is the equivalent of doing the same kind of operation in Python. Then if you list the directory contents again here, then you print out the contents. Now you see that there is no longer earth. Earth no longer exists, but earth has now been changed to this bit here. So this is how you're going to rename your files. Another common operation which you might want to do is to delete an existing file. For you to delete an existing file, you have to use this particular function, remove. So in this case, you're going to say os.remove followed by the name of the file you want to delete, which is this particular case. So if we do that, if we get the updated list, then we print out the contents. Okay, then here in this particular case, we want to delete this particular file, the one we renamed from earth to Gaia. And if you want to delete that particular file, so we'll say os.remove, then gaia.json, like that. Now if we get a new list of the items in our planets folder, then if you print contents here, you see that Gaia is no longer there because it's been deleted. So that's how you are going to remove a particular file, using remove. If you want to remove multiple files, you carry out the same operation, but you have to use a for loop. The same way we created multiple files, you can do a multiple remove of everything which is in the particular folder, as we are going to see. Okay. Next, you might want to check if a particular file exists or a particular folder exists. There's a function for that, which is os.path.exists. This particular one, you simply give it the name of the file or the name of the folder you want to check if it exists or not. If that particular file or folder is there, then it will give you true. If it's not there, then it's going to give you false. So based on that true or false answer you're going to get, then you can display an appropriate message telling someone, say, this particular file exists or not. So in this particular case, let us check for venus.js. So this is the file I want to check if it exists or not. I'm not really sure why. Yeah, something when they disconnect the projector, they need. it goes back to behaving itself. Okay, so that one, Venus. So that's the name of the file. We want to check if it exists or not. So if I get this file name, I give it to os.path.exist like that, then I run this. I get an answer, then I print out that particular answer, I get a true. So if a file exists, then you give it to that particular os.path.exist, it's going to give you a true answer. Then based on the answer you're going to get, then you can do something. You can write a small line of computer code like this. So in this particular case, that's your file name. Then you say, if os.path.exists, then file name. If this particular file name exists, as we have seen, Venus exists, we're going to get a true. So this whole particular function which you have here is going to evaluate to true. And if it's true, now that's decision making. If it's true, we want to print out the message file name exists. So we're going to say the file venus.js exists. If the file does not exist, then it's going to print out the file does not exist. So in this particular case, like that. We'll do that. Then we'll also repeat the same operation here. But remember, we have already deleted f down here. So now here we're going to change Venus. We're going to change Venus to just a minute, to s. Now s no longer exists. So in this particular case, this other line of code should tell us that s does not exist. So the first line, when it runs, it should tell us Venus exists. The other bit, when it runs, it should tell us that s doesn't exist. So you see, so the first one, when we run the first one with Venus, this particular bit evaluates to true, then it prints out a message, file venus.js exists. The other line here, since you're using s, which doesn't exist anymore in this particular list, particular directory, when you run that, now it tells us file s JSON does not exist. So depending on what the status of the check is, if the file exists, then that particular function will give you a true, then you can print out an appropriate message. If the file does not exist, then you can do likewise. It's going to run the other one. So basically, we are combining some decision-making stuff with what we have just done today. There. Any questions on that? So that's how you can check if a particular file on a computer exists or not. You need to give the name of the file and stuff like that. You can delete multiple files at once. So in this particular case, if you want to delete multiple files at once, you have to use the for loop. So here we're in planets, so we get a list of the items in this particular folder, which is now Mercury, Venus, and Mars. So based on this particular list, we run the following for loop. We say for file in contents, then under this for loop we say os.remove file. In this particular case, contents, we know that contents is a list of these particular 3 files. So this for loop will be picking one item at a time. It will pick the first one, mercury.json, it will put it in file, then it will carry out its instructions, which is to delete file. So it will delete the mercury. Next, it will pick this other one, Venus.json, it will store it in file, then it will delete it. Next, it will get this particular one, Mars.json, it will store it in file, then it will delete it. So when you run this one, this particular line of code removes all the directories, all the items in our directory, and when we check for directory items and we print out contents, now you find that our contents is empty because all the items which are in planets have been removed through this particular for loop which we have created here. Okay. So that is basically the equivalent of you doing your Control A. You select everything in a folder, then you press on the delete key on your keyboard, and that does that. So instead of doing Control A and that particular line of code will do your things. First of all, of course, there is also the part where you collect everything. You collect this. You collect a list of all the items in your folder. You store it in contents. Then, if you want to print it, you can print it fine. But if you're sure that particular function works fine, then you straight away move to this bit. Then you remove everything. So you have to make sure that you are interested in removing everything. The next task which we are going to do is currently right now, we started out by creating the planets folder. We got into this planets folder. So right now, we have been working from the planets folder. We created files. We renamed some of them. We deleted all the files in the planets folder. Now it's time for us to come out of the planets folder. So the way you do that, the way you come out of the planets folder is by giving the function change dir. You give it this particular 2 dots string. Remember this particular 2 dot string, when you started out, it represents the parent directory, the directory from where you came from. So we are telling Python, fine, our business in planets is done. We want to get out of planets back to where we came from. So we're going to say os.change dir, and you put those 2 dots there. That's going to do that. Now, when you get now that you have come out of the planets, you want to find out where am I now? In which folder am I working from? We're working from planets previously. So the way you get information about the directory where you're working from is this one, getwd. So when you run that, it gives you ans, then you print out your ans there. Now it shows you that, okay, fine. Now you are now working from this particular home folder. We have now come out of the planets folder where we're working from. So currently, our planets folder is empty. And if you were working with the folder, now it has become empty. It's a good thing to just get rid of it. So the way you get rid of a folder which is empty is to use this particular function, rm dir. Rm stands for remove. So in this particular case, the way that's going to work, you say os.rm, then you put the name of the folder you want to remove. In this particular case, the name of the folder we want to remove is planet. So we say os.rm dir, then the folder I want to remove is planets. Then, after we have carried out this the deletion of planets, we collect an updated list of all the items in our current working directory, which is contents. Then you print out contents. Then, lastly, you check if planets is still a member of this list contents. If you have succeeded in deleting planets, then you run this particular check. It should give you a false value. And that's what we get there, false. Okay, so we have come to the end of this particular short lecture on how you carry out some of these common computer tasks which we do all the time, creating folders, doing things, stuff like that. There's other things like copying which I've not done, but you can always find out how to do that using Python through the OS module. Any questions? Yes?
And then let's say, maybe the list contains about 10 files in there. I just want to delete 2 or 3 of them, but then I want to specify those, but just in a single line.
You can, you remember you have a list, right?
Yes.
And when we looked at lists, there's a way you can remove items from a list. You can remove items from a list by value, or you can remove items from a list by position. So in this particular case, if you know the item you are trying to remove, you can simply remove it by value. So you can remove specific items from a list by value or by position. What we have is a list. The same things we do with lists, you can do them here. It's a list which you're creating here. And whatever we did with lists, you can still do them here also.